Oh, hi. This is Chicken Philosophy. Teilhard de Chardin, Part 17, in which I will continue reading The Divine Milieu by Teilhard de Chardin. Do you like my accent? Picking up right where somebody left off last time. And if you would like the playlist, in other words, if you want to start at the beginning, or you want to kind of see like, what was the last one I saw? I don't know if it was part 13 or 15 or whatever. You can see like the little red line underneath and see which ones you've seen and which ones you haven't. Anyway, here's the playlist. That's the Teilhard de Chardin playlist. And then you can, decide if you want to start with the first one. Kind of, right? Like what to do. Anyway, yes. So this is, Teilhard de Chardin is like one of the cool ones. Okay. I don't know who I'm talking to exactly. I know one or two people I'm talking to. Hi. I know you know by now, generally, at least as well as I do, who Pierre Teilhard de Chardin is. Basically, he was something of a visionary, not exactly a rebel, but I don't know, maybe he was a little bit divergent. He had his, perception of reality, and at a very young age, he had kind of he was able to fit together his Catholicism of his upbringing with the science of, I kind of like the light effect, even though it's technically a flaw. I think because the phone was in front of the air conditioner and the lens got a little bit just slightly foggy. It seems to be pretty crisp. I mean, you can see the words on the books behind me if you're looking at this in HD. But yeah, there's a little bit of a light thing happening. So Teilhard de Chardin, he wrote a lot. He had a lot to say. He, in his mind, the scientific consensus reality did not contradict the core concepts of the Catholic Church, basically, which is kind of what made him an oddball. And kind of an interesting person to look at. I mean, depending on where you're coming from, I mean, it doesn't really matter where you're coming from if you have the, interest in setting aside, you might have your set ideas of this is what reality is, this is what's true, this is what's false. Werewolves, yes. Vampires, no. Zombies, yes. Dinosaurs, no. I don't know what your personal sense of reality is. But whatever it is, if you are interested in seeing the world through someone else's, as I am at times, it depends on my mood. Sometimes, I find myself being like, this is stupid. And other times I'm like, oh, wow. All right. Yeah, I see what he's saying, And so it's kind of a roll of many dice, what you get here. First of all, you saw the wheel. I'm Gwydion. I'm a host of 1/3 of the episodes of Chicken Philosophy lately. Basically, more or less. And, so there's that. And also there's I don't know, just how it strikes me and what it is that Teilhard de Chardin is saying. All of these things go together to determine, what the experience is. And I don't know what the experience is going to be, but we can both get a little bit of a clue, mostly you, because Editor Edward is going to begin playing some music, and he's going to choose at least this first track based on the overall milieu of the episode. Okay, Editor Edward, hit it. Elephant. This is the elephant in the room. Actually, if you count Ganesh and other Ganesh and other Ganesh and other Ganesh, then this is one of 5 elephants in the room. And on that note, I will go ahead and begin today's recital, The Divine Milieu by Teilhard de Chardin. Let us take a comparison as our starting point. Imagine a deep-sea diver. I was just watching that episode of Knight Rider where you find out, oh my God, Michael Knight is a diver, a certified diver, certified by Special Forces, or so he says when he's undercover. But he probably was, given his background in Vietnam and all that. Season 2, I don't know what episode. All right. Imagine a deep-sea diver trying to get back from the seabed to the clear light of day. Do you hear the rain, by the way? Turn off the music, Editor Edward. You hear that? Okay, bring in music. Sorry to make you jump around like a monkey, Editor Edward. All right. Or imagine a traveler on a fog-bound mountainside climbing upwards towards the summit, bathed in light. For each of these men, space is divided into 2 zones, marked with opposing properties. Sounds like dualism to me. Sorry, that was stupid. Let's keep reading. The one behind and beneath appears ever darker, while the one in front and above becomes ever lighter. Both diver and climber can succeed in making their way towards the second zone only if they use everything around and about them as points of leverage. I feel like there's some overlap with the Carl Jung in just that statement. So, in other words, rather than ignoring, pushing away, throwing out, setting aside, locking in the closet, things that you've decided aren't related to your spiritual journey toward cosmic oneness or whatever. God or whatever, enlightenment, whatever you want to call it. Rather than doing that, you incorporate those things in to the process of getting there. Makes sense, right? It seems kind of obvious when you think about it. All right, anyway. Moreover, in the course of their task, the light above them grows brighter with each advance made. And at the same time, the area which has been traversed, as it is traversed, ceases to hold the light and is engulfed in darkness. Let us remember these stages, for they express symbolically all the elements we need in order to understand how we should touch and handle matter with a proper sense of reverence. Above all, matter is not just the weight that drags us down, the mire that sucks us in. What's a mire? Oh, sorry. The bramble that bars our way, in itself and before we find ourselves where we are. Yes. What? Yes, the bramble that... But before we find ourselves where we are and before we choose, it is simply the slope on which we can go up, just as well as go down. Love in an Elevator, Aerosmith. 1990, whatever, that comeback they had. Was that their comeback? Well, anyway, I think they kind of fell out of the spotlight and came back in before I noticed them. The Run DMC thing, that was kind of their return to the scene, and then Love in an Elevator was like, I think 4 years after that. I don't know. I'm just freeballing here. So anyway. 'Cause I'm free balling. The medium that can uphold or give way, the wind that can overthrow or lift up, of its nature, and as a result of original sin. It is true that it represents a perpetual impulse towards failure. But by nature too, and as a result of the incarnation, with a capital I, not just any old incarnation, you know what I'm saying? It contains the spur, or the allurement, to be our accomplice towards heightened being. Yes, that's exactly what Be Here Now... Why is Vajrapani always... he's out of balance. It's like poorly made. Anyway, Be Here Now, Remember, Be Here Now, Remember, Be Here Now, Remember by Ram Dass. Now remember, be here now, remember. You know, he basically says the same thing about matter, helping you in your spiritual enlightenment. I'll just keep reading. Sucks us in, incarnation, heightened being. And this counterbalances and even dominates the foams peccati. Editor Edward, I'm sorry to do this to you, but could you translate foams peccati for us? It literally means the tinder, not like Tinder. Like before there was the app, there was like Flint and Tinder, which you used to make fire. That's what the app is named after. Anyway, the tinder for sin, I think is the literal meaning. The dregs of sin stick around in our minds through the memories of evil committed, and they also remain in our desires through the habitual bad decisions and actions that shape us. It's basically, it seems to be the Catholic version of the Yetzir Hora, which is Hebrew, it means evil inclination. And for those of you who are like, Yetzir, any relation to Yetzira? Yeah, it's the same word, different conjugation of the same word. Thank you, Editor Edward. The full truth of our situation is that here below, and by virtue of our immersion in the universe, we are each one of us placed within its layers or on its slopes at a specific point defined by the present moment in the history of the world, the place of our birth and our individual vocation. And from that starting point, variously situated at different levels, The task assigned to us is to climb towards the light, passing through so as to attain God. A given series of created things which are not exactly obstacles, but rather footholds. Intermediaries to be made use of, nourishment to be taken, sap to be purified, and elements to be associated with us and borne along with us. That being so, and still as a result of our initial position among things, and also as a result of each position we subsequently occupy in matter, matter falls into two distinct zones, differentiated according to our effort. The zone already left behind or arrived at, to which we should not return, or at which we should not pause, lest we fall back. So he's obviously not talking about like the Zen path. It's like, anyway, this is the zone, unless like very abstractly, but no, it doesn't really apply to like sitting on your Zafu for decades, right? Because you're exactly where you were and you're not planning on going anywhere, right? Anyway, and like spending decades just trying to get rid of that last little tiny fleck of desire for enlightenment, trying to get to the place where you're free of trying to not try. There is no try, only do or no do. Not do-do. Like, isn't that a Yoda thing? Oh, yeah, I was thinking Zelda, for those Zelda fans. The Triforce? There is no try. The Triforce? There's something there. I don't know what it is. Yoda and Star Wars on one hand, Zelda, Link, and Hyrule on the other, and something about trying and the double entendre with, try like TRY and TRI, meaning three, because of the Triforce. Wisdom, power, and courage. Okay, so anyway, where was I? Yes. This is the zone of matter, in the material and carnal sense, and the zone offered to our renewed efforts towards progress, search, conquest, and, quote, divinization, end quote, not to be confused with divination. Divinization, to make something divine. Divination, something else. It's where you flip a coin and decide whether or not to go to the movies with your friends or go home and pass out, for example. Maybe not exactly that. That's a close cousin of divination. Anyway, the zone of matter taken in the spiritual sense, and the frontier between these two zones is essentially relative and shifting. That which is good, sanctifying, and spiritual for my brother below, or beside me on the mountainside, can be material, misleading, or bad for me. Yeah, I mean, if you're a Catholic, the brother below you on the mountainside, generally considered, I know that's not what he means, and I don't agree with that. I think he could be just as good for you as anything in the material plane to help you on your path. Anyway, what? What I rightly allowed myself yesterday, I must perhaps deny myself today. It's not November. And conversely, actions which would have been a grave betrayal in a Saint Aloysius Gonzaga or a Saint Anthony may well be models for me if I am to follow in the footsteps of these saints. In other words, the soul can only rejoin God after having traversed a specific path through matter. Oh. That's kind of like Golden Pathy, Paul Atreides-y a little bit. You got to stay on the razor sharp edge of the particular path through matter. No, probably not. Maybe he means something that makes sense, but yes, which path can be seen as the distance which separates, but it can also be seen as the road which links. Without certain possessions and certain victories, no man exists as God wishes him to be. Each one of us has his Jacob's ladder. There's what's her name, and then Rachel, and then 7 years between each. No, that's not what he means. It's a vision he had, angels and shit going up and down, right? And a good movie. If you haven't seen it, Jacob's Ladder. Whose rungs are formed of a series of objects. Thus it is not our business to withdraw from the world before our time. Rather, let us learn to orientate our being in the flux of things. Not my favorite season of Doctor Who, but I'm not one of those assholes that's like, oh no, it's not a white male, Like, she did her best. And this current one, I'm enjoying. So, go ahead and unsubscribe right now and click thumbs down and curse my name unto the ages. I'm enjoying season 1 of Disney's Doctor Who. It's the most contentious thing I've said in weeks. All right. Where are we? Then the baby one was a little difficult to get through, I admit. And when they all started dancing, I was like, what? But David Tennant did put salt at the edge of the universe, so, at least there's an explanation for why everything's different now. What? Then instead of the force of gravity which drags us down to the abyss of self-indulgence and selfishness, we shall feel a salutary, quote, component, end quote, emerge from created things, which, by a process we have already described, will enlarge our horizons, will snatch, great movie, us away from our pettiness and impel us imperilously towards a widening of our vision. Good character in the Marvel movies. Towards the renunciation of cherished pleasure. Little treasure. Good song from Music for the Masses? Depeche Mode. Towards the desire for ever more spiritual beauty. Matter, which at first seemed to counsel us towards the maximum pleasure and the minimum effort, emerges as the principle of minimum pleasure and maximum effort. In this case, too, the law which applies to the individual would seem to be a small-scale version of the law which applies to the whole. That's whole with a W, pervert. I don't know. I think that if somebody has a sense, there's two things that come to mind. One is a person who's getting to a point in life where they're starting to think about death and mortality. And they don't like the idea, for example, of having a relatively short life, and they would rather have a long life. So instead of enjoying that cheeseburger and vanilla shake, they opt for intermittent fasting or a salad or whatever, and water, because they're seeking the pleasure of a long life. They're recoiling from the pain of the fear of death. So what's the fucking difference other than the fact that they've learned to seek pleasure and recoil from pain on a bigger scale in their own life than just, what do I want to eat today? And similarly, if a person, there's a Clockwork Orange kind of angle thing happening here. If a person is programmed in such a way that they vomit when they try to do anything violent, okay, set that aside. That has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. It just seems related. If a person feels that they will torment in eternal hellfire if they look at YouPorn again, whereas if they refrain from doing that and instead pray the rosary, then they will have eternal happiness and be surrounded by their loving family and angels and harps and shit, and they like those things. And then they do a rosary. Are they not seeking pleasure and recoiling from the pain of the fear of hellfire? So what's the difference, other than the scale at which they're approaching seeking pleasure and recoiling from pain? End of sermon. It didn't have a point. It had a point. It just doesn't have a satisfactory call to action or anything. I guess maybe just self-awareness is what are you really doing here, Is the goal, and it's like one of those things like in Buddhism, like the Zen monk who's trying not to try, seeking to purge him or herself of the attachment to the idea of becoming enlightened, because it's the last attachment they have that's keeping them from becoming enlightened, perhaps. Or if a person is seeking the pleasure of doing what the priest says and being the goodest boy in the choir, even if they're an adult and it's an inner child thing, you know what I mean. Not a good boy in the gross sense, you know what I mean. Never mind. And not wanting to, and then similar, obviously if somebody is being rebellious and doing all the things they're not supposed to do, then that gives them pleasure. Or maybe it gives them pain. Maybe they're confronting their fear of being a sinner and going to hell by just charging right into it. Maybe that's actually, in some cases, maybe very rare cases, the right path, whereas the person who fearfully, just remains on what they perceive to be the wholesome path, isn't actually getting anywhere, isn't confronting anything, isn't processing anything, isn't learning anything, isn't becoming useful to anyone, Not that the goal should be becoming useful to other people, but or maybe that is the goal, but I don't think so. I don't think that we should assume that it is. All right, anyway, I don't know. Maybe there's something there, maybe not. What, in this case, too, the law which applies to the individual would seem to be a small-scale version of the law which applies to the whole with a W, you pervert. It would surely not be far wrong to suggest that, in its universality, the world, too, has a prescribed path to follow before attaining its consummation. There can really be no doubt of it. Oh, really? Because I've got one. Sorry. No. Yes. It's all very scientific and true. Sorry. I'll just read. If the material totality of the world includes energies which cannot be made use of, And if, more unfortunately, it contains perverted energies and elements which are slowly separated from it, it is still more certain that it contains a certain quality of the spiritual power of which the progressive sublimation in Christo Jesu is, for the Creator, the fundamental operation taking place. At the present time, this power is still diffused almost everywhere. Nothing, however insignificant or crude it may appear, is without some trace of it, and the task of the body of Christ, the priests and shit, living in this context, living in his faithful, what? Yes? Okay. Is patiently to sort out those heavenly forces, to extract, without letting any of it be lost, that chosen substance. Spill not thy chosen substance. Sorry. Little by little, it is November after all. No. Little by little, we may, it's not November, it's June. Anyway, little by little, we may rest assured the work is being done. Thanks to the multitude of individuals and vocations, the Spirit of God insinuates itself everywhere and is everywhere at work. It is the great tree we spoke of a moment ago. Oh, you mean like a week or two ago? Okay, yeah. Okay, a moment ago. Whose sunlit branches refine and turn to flowers the sap extracted by the humblest of its roots. As the work progresses, certain zones, no doubt, become worked out. Within each individual life, as we have noted, the frontier between spiritual matter and carnal matter is constantly moving upward. And in the same way, in proportion as humanity is Christianized, it feels less and less need for certain earthly nourishment. Contemplation and chastity should thus tend, quite legitimately, to gain mastery over anxious work and direct possession. This is the general drift of matter, drift, the individual word being in quotes, towards spirit. This movement must have its term. One day, the whole divinizable substance of matter will have passed into the souls of men. All the chosen dynamisms will have been recovered, and then our world will be ready for the parousia. Editor Edward, I know I keep making you do stuff, but can you tell us what parousia is?
It's the second coming of Christ.
All right, then. Who can fail to perceive the great symbolic gesture of baptism in this general history of matter? Well, that's true. You got to use physical water, because Jesus said so. Didn't he? Yes, he did. To Nicodemus that one time. Christ immerses himself in the waters of Jordan, right? Symbol of the forces of earth. These he sanctifies. Is that what was happening? I thought it was sanctifying him, because then the bird... Never mind. And as he emerges, in the words of St. Gregory of Nyssa, with the water which runs off his body, he elevates the whole world. Immersion and emergence. So like immersion with an I and emergence with an E. Participation in things and sublimation. Possession and renunciation. Crossing through and being borne onwards. That is the twofold yet single movement which answers the challenge of matter in order to save it. And then there's like a little footnote. I'll read it. Because I think it's actually Teilhard de Chardin making a footnote on what Teilhard de Chardin wrote. So, all right, what does he want to say about what he said? His afterthought on what he wrote. The sensuous mysticisms and certain neo-Pelagianisms, such as Americanism. He's saying some stuff. I don't know, it sounds like something. By paying too much attention to the first of these phases, have fallen into the error of seeking divine love and the divine kingdom on the same level as human affections and human progress. Okay. Conversely, by concentrating too much on the second phase, some exaggerated forms of Christianity conceive perfection as built upon the destruction of, quote, nature, end quote. True Christian supernatural, frequently defined by the church, the true Christian supernatural, frequently defined by the church, neither leaves the creature where he is on his own plane, nor suppresses him. It, quote, suranimates, end quote, him, animates. Again, I think it might be a French word that, like, this is the best they can do in English, is to, like, since Sir made it into English, with the whole 1066, was it? The whole French invasion of English, the language, for a few hundred years. And animates is also another word that was introduced. So you just shove them together the way they shove them together, and maybe it'll have the same meaning as it does in French. I'm assuming that's what's going on here. It suranimates him. It must surely be obvious that however transcendent and creative they may be, God's love and ardor could only fall upon the human heart. That is to say, upon an object prepared, parentheses, from near or from afar, and parentheses, by means of all the nourishments of the earth. It is astonishing that so few minds should succeed, in this as in other cases, in grasping the notion of transformation. In case you have trouble grasping the notion of transformation, you can watch the 3.5-hour recital in which Edward recites our dad's book, Transformations. It's good. Where were we? Sometimes the thing transformed seems to them to be the old thing unchanged, and at other times they see it in only the entirely new. In the first case, it is the spirit that eludes them. In the second case, it is the matter. Though not so crude as the first excess, the second is shown by experience to be no less destructive of the equilibrium of mankind. All right, so that was all the footnote on what he said. Now we're going to finish the section. So that not much left. Matter, you in whom I find both seduction and strength, you in whom I find blandishment and virility, you who can enrich and destroy, I surrender myself to your mighty layers, with faith in the heavenly influences which have sweetened and purified your waters. The virtue of Christ has passed into you. Let your attractions lead me forward. Let your sap be the food that nourishes me. Let your resistance give me toughness. Let your robberies and inroads give me freedom. And finally, let your whole being lead me towards Godhead. And that's the end of part 2. There's parts 1, 2, and 3, A, B, and C within parts, within parts, within parts. But there's a part 1 here. There's a part 2 here. Now we're finished with part 2. And all that's left is part 3. We're about 2/3 of the way through the book, if not 3/4. And cool. I don't know. I found 1 or 2 things in there that were thought-provoking. Some of it, of course, was a little little like specifically dogmatic Catholic for my personal taste, but it might be just fine for someone else. I don't know. It might be like absolutely abhorrent and, you know, unable to be digested by others. You know, that's just kind of the nature of things. You know how it goes. And let's see, is there anything else before I close? Nope.